All right, for this deep dive, we're going to get into a logical error that honestly comes up all the time in these debates about science and creation.
It really does. It's a fundamental confusion.
So let's start with an analogy that makes it pretty clear. Think about a Ford engine.
Okay.
If a mechanic breaks down for you how that engine works,
Yeah.
the pistons, combustion, all the thermodynamics, they're giving you a mechanism explanation.
That's exactly right. Now, if you listen to that whole mechanical explanation and you conclude, well, I guess Henry Ford never existed, you've just made what philosophers call a category mistake.
Right? You've confused how it operates with why it even exists in the first place.
Precisely. The laws of combustion explain how the engine runs, but Henry Ford, the agent, explains why there's an engine at all.
And this is where things get so tangled. Because science, by its very definition, it can only invoke natural causes. That's its job.
That's methodological naturalism. Yep, that's
Right.
the rule book.
But then that's used to argue against the need for a designer. And the accusation that always comes up is, you're just arguing for a god of the gaps.
Oh, absolutely. The argument sounds very persuasive, right? You just look at history. We used to say Zeus threw lightning bolts.
And now we know it's just atmospheric electricity.
Exactly. So the assumption becomes, just give science enough time and it'll fill in all the gaps. We won't need an agent for anything.
It appeals to that idea of progress. But the sources we're looking at make a really a crucial distinction here. There are two very different kinds of gaps.
Yes, the first one is the weak one. It's what you call a gap of ignorance,
That's the classic, I don't know how this works, so I guess God must have done it.
which is, frankly, bad theology and bad science. But the other kind is totally different. It's a gap of requirement.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means you know exactly how the mechanism works, and the mechanism itself seems to logically require an external agent. It points to a mind.
So it's not an argument from what you don't know. It's an argument from what you do know.
Precisely. Which brings us to the nature of physical laws themselves. What do they actually do?
The sources are really clear on this. They are descriptive, not creative. That's a huge point.
It is. Think about it. Newton's laws can perfectly describe the trajectory of a billiard ball.
Right.
But those laws didn't create the ball or the table or the force that set it in motion. They just describe a pattern that's already there.
So to say the universe created itself via its own laws is, well, it's completely illogical. It's like saying X created X.
And if the laws aren't creative, then you have to ask why the constants that govern them are so unbelievably precise, the fine-tuning.
The numbers are just staggering, aren't they?
Yeah.
We're talking about a precision of something like 1 part in 10 to the power of 120.
A number you can't even get your head around. And the standard naturalistic safety net for this is, of course, the multiverse theory.
Ah, yes. The idea that if you have infinite universes, one of them was bound to get lucky and have the right settings.
But the source material really goes after this, calling it a massive violation of Occam's razor.
The simplest explanation is usually the best.
Right. You're positing infinite, unobservable, untestable realities just to explain the one observable universe we have. It's a metaphysical move, not really a scientific one.
Which brings it all back to your starting point, your presupposition.
It all comes down to it. The data itself, a fossil, a canyon wall, is neutral. Your interpretation is driven by what you assume to be true from the start.
The Grand Canyon is the perfect example of this.
It is. The evolutionist, assuming uniformitarianism, sees the canyon and their model says little water, lots of time.
Gradual erosion over millions of years.
But the creationist, starting with a presupposition of biblical revelation, sees the exact same data and concludes lots of water, little time, a catastrophic flood.
Same evidence, two completely different stories,
Yeah,
all because of the starting assumption about agency.
exactly.
So, to bring this all home for you listening to this, let's end with one last analogy. Your smartphone. Think about the physical object. Could the plastic and glass form naturally? Maybe. Could the silicon organize itself into complex hardware? And for the sake of argument, let's just grant that.
Let's say mechanism alone could produce the hardware.
But here's the real question. Could the operating system, the software, the code, the actual information that gives the hardware function, could that just arise from the silicon?
Matter plus energy gets you the hardware.
But information, the software, that seems to always come from a mind. And that's the real challenge for any explanation that relies only on mechanism.
And that, sets us up perfectly for our next deep dive, looking at the software of life itself, DNA, and asking if it points to mechanism or to agency. Okay, let's unpack this deep dive. We're tackling, I mean, it's really the most fundamental question in biology.
It absolutely is. We're talking about abiogenesis.
Right, which is just the process of how you get from, non-living chemicals to the very first self-replicating cell.
And this is the ultimate starting line for you. Because if abiogenesis turns out to be, say, chemically or mathematically impossible, then the whole theory of evolution, natural selection, it just collapses. There's nothing alive to select in the first place.
Absolutely. So our mission here is to look at the consensus view, the old primordial soup idea, and then dig into the challenges our sources raise against it. The chemical, the structural, and the mathematical.
And to do that, you really have to start with the 1953 Mille-Urey experiment. It's still the strongest argument for life, just assembling by chance.
Exactly. They took what they thought was an early Earth atmosphere, methane, ammonia, some hydrogen, water vapor, and they blasted it.
Zapped it with electrical sparks to act like lightning.
And it worked, right? I mean, they made amino acids.
They did. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. And the immediate conclusion was, wow, give it a few billion years and life is inevitable.
But it's important for you to know the science has moved on. The community sees this as a historical step, not the final word.
Right. Researchers now look at deep-sea vents, the RNA world hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's a lot more specific.
Okay, so this is where the critiques in our material get really, really sharp. Let's start with the chemical barrier, the oxygen paradox. My notes say Miller and Urey, they deliberately left oxygen out of their setup.
They had to. Oxygen destroys chemical bonds. It's called oxidation. If it was in there, they wouldn't have formed anything.
But that creates the paradox, doesn't it? A real catch-22.
Exactly. If oxygen was there, the amino acids would have been destroyed. But if oxygen wasn't there, you have no ozone layer.
And without an ozone layer,
UV radiation from the sun would have just fried the ammonia and any amino acids that did form. So life can't start in the open atmosphere. It's a trap either way.
wow. Okay, so if the chemistry is a trap, let's talk about the shape of these molecules, the structural problem.
Chirality.
Yes, chirality. So amino acids come in two forms that are mirror images of each other, left-handed and right-handed.
L and D forms, yeah. And what's fascinating is that any natural process, like the one Miller and Urey simulated, always makes a perfect 50-50 mix of both, a racemic mixture.
But life isn't a 50-50 mix.
Not even close. Every single protein in every living thing, you, me, a plant, a bacterium, is made 100% of left-handed amino acids.
That seems impossible, just by chance. What happens if you add just one of the right-handed ones?
The whole protein misfolds. It loses its shape, its function, it's useless. So how does blind chance pick only the left-handed one, not just once, but thousands of times in a row for a single protein?
And that leads us straight to the math, the mathematical barrier.
This is maybe the toughest hurdle of all.
So to form just one simple protein, you need about 100 amino acids, all in a very specific order.
And that's a tiny protein, by the way.
A tiny one. And the sources give the odds of that happening by chance as 1 in 10 to the power of 130.
A number that's it's functionally zero. To put that in perspective for you, scientists estimate there are only about 10 to the 80 atoms in the entire observable universe.
So you don't have enough matter in the universe to even run the lottery enough times.
Exactly. And more time doesn't help. It just creates more disorder. The analogy the critics use is like hoping a perfect dictionary will form from the letters flying out of an explosion in a print shop.
So looking at our sources, you're left with two very different ways of thinking. On one side, you have scientific models that rely on, immense time and maybe some unknown factors to overcome these odds.
And on the other side, you have the critics in our material who say, wait a minute, when you see a complex, information-rich machine like a cell, that's statistically impossible to assemble randomly. Well, it implies intelligent input. It implies design.
So the final thought we'll leave you with is this. If the probability of assembling even one functional protein is beyond all the probabilistic resources of the entire universe, what does that really imply for the foundation of how all life began?
Okay, so let's just dive right in. When scientists discovered DNA in the 20th century, they found something that was, far beyond just complex chemistry.
Right.
They realized life isn't just matter and energy. It's fundamentally information, all encoded in just a 4-letter alphabet, A, C, T, and G.
That's exactly right. And the core thesis in the sources we're looking at is that information is its own fundamental quantity. It's separate from whatever is carrying it.
Okay, so it's not just the material itself.
Not at all. I mean, Think of it this way, and this is a classic analogy. Physics can explain the paper and the ink in a book, sure, but it can't explain the origin of the message.
You have the actual story.
The story. That's informational, not material.
But if you're trying to explain that without, bringing a mind into it, the standard defense is always the same thing, isn't it? The infinite monkey theorem?
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's always positioned as the strongest argument for naturalism. The idea that given enough time, enough trials, order has to eventually come from chaos.
Like a monkey eventually typing out Shakespeare.
Exactly. And in this view, natural selection is sort of the evolutionary monkey that's randomly writing the code for a human being.
It's an appealing idea.
Yeah.
If you just wait long enough, something functional should pop up.
Yeah.
But that brings up a really crucial question. Is DNA just a functional pattern, or is it something more?
Oh, it's definitely more. And this is where the linguistic argument comes in. Some of the sources draw heavily on Werner Getz's work here. Information isn't just one thing. It has like 5 different levels. It starts at level 1, which is just statistics, simple patterns, and it goes all the way up to level 5, apologetics, which is purpose.
Okay, so where do natural processes fit in? Things like random mutation or even wind erosion. Where do they stop on that scale?
They stop at the first level, the statistical level. Natural forces can produce patterns, think of a snowflake structure or sand dunes.
Yeah.
But what they never, ever produce is semantics. That's level 3, meaning a monkey might randomly type CAT, but the monkey has no idea what a cat is. That sequence is statistically possible, but it has 0 semantic meaning. No purpose.
And DNA is just packed with meaning. It's a precise set of instructions saying, build this protein right here, right now. It's all semantic content.
Absolutely. So the logical implication, just based on our uniform experience, is pretty clear. Whenever we find complex semantic information software code, hieroglyphs, anything, we logically infer a mind was behind it.
So to assume DNA just wrote itself kind of goes against everything we actually observe.
It's an assumption that violates all observation, yes.
And speaking of systems that seem hard to piece together randomly, the sources also dig into that classic chicken and egg paradox.
Yeah, but they frame it as a hardware versus software dilemma. It points straight toward irreducible complexity.
Explain that.
So DNA is the software, it's the blueprint, the instructions, but those instructions are totally useless unless you have the hardware to read them.
Which would be the protein machines.
The complex protein machines, right, like RNA polymerase, they're needed to read the DNA.
And here's the kicker. You can't build those protein machines without the instructions that are on the DNA.
But you can't read the DNA without those machines already built and fully functional. They completely depend on each other.
It's a catch-22.
That's the definition of irreducible complexity. And the argument in these sources is that this demands they appeared simultaneously. The whole system had to be functional as a complete whole right from the start.
It really draws a sharp contrast between the two big worldviews presented.
It does. You have the materialistic view, which starts with mass and energy and, tries to somehow evolve a mind from that.
And the other view.
The alternative view starts with mind, what some call the logos, or the word, which then creates the mass and energy and puts the information into the system.
So the scientific observation that summarizes all this is pretty straightforward. We always see minds producing information.
We do, and we never, not once, observe unguided matter producing it.
So if we just synthesize this whole deep dive, the main takeaway is that analyzing DNA as a language shows us that, physics can explain the carrier.
The physical code, sure. But the message itself, the information, that points towards something else entirely. It acts as really strong evidence for, intelligent, intentional design.
And to leave you with a final thought from the material we reviewed, the whole concept of junk DNA was for a long time used as an argument against design.
Right, the idea that evolution left behind all this useless leftover code.
But recent huge studies like the ENCODE project have now shown that almost the entire human genome is active. It's transcribed, it's being used.
Which suggests there are layers of complexity and instruction that we're only just beginning to understand.
So definitely something to chew on as you think about the true source of life's code. Okay, let's dive in. We're going to unpack something that really sits at the heart of so much confusion in the origins debate. And that's the word evolution itself. People start a conversation, but they're using 2 completely different dictionaries.
Exactly. And our mission today is to look at that, to analyze the logical fallacy that comes up so often. Some people call it the bait and switch.
The bait and switch.
Yeah, where evidence for one thing is, presented as proof for something else entirely. We have to draw a line right away between microevolution and macroevolution.
Right, so micro would be, what, small changes within a type of animal?
Exactly, like a big dog and a little dog, or finches getting slightly different beaks, variations within a kind.
But macro is the big jump.
That's the big one, a dog becoming a non-dog. The problem is textbooks will show you clear, observable examples of micro and then use that to sell you on macro.
And that's a powerful tactic, because when naturalists say evolution is observed today,
Yeah.
they're not wrong, are they? They have really strong evidence.
Oh, absolutely. They point to bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. You can see it happen in a petri dish.
Or those famous finches in the Galapagos. During a drought, the ones with bigger beaks survive better. It's visible. It's happening now.
And that data is compelling. We're not denying the observation. Change happens, but we have to ask, what is the nature of that change? What's the direction?
Okay, so what's the pivot here?
The pivot is understanding the role of natural selection. Think of it less like a creative engineer and more like a quality control manager.
A quality control manager, I like that.
Yeah. I mean, imagine you're at a car factory. Your job is to inspect all the cars coming off the line and get rid of any that have defects.
Okay.
You'll end up with a fleet of higher quality cars, right? The best ones survive the inspection.
Sure, that makes sense. But you'll never get an airplane.
You will never get an airplane, that's the point. Selection explains the survival of the fittest, but it doesn't explain the arrival of the fittest. It can't create something fundamentally new.
So for macroevolution, you'd need a mechanism that creates brand new information.
A massive amount of it. You need new genetic code for things that weren't there before. For wings, for eyes, for lungs. But when we look at the top examples, like antibiotic resistance, we find the opposite is happening.
The opposite? How so?
Well, let's take that bacteria example. When it becomes resistant to a drug, say penicillin, it hasn't actually built a new complex shield.
So what did it do?
Often it broke something. It lost a function. For example, some bacteria have these little transport proteins on their cell walls, like a tiny door.
A door that the drug uses to get inside.
Precisely. So the mutation causes the bacteria to lose the gene for that door. The door is gone, so the drug can't get in to kill it.
So it survives by breaking a part of itself. It's not an upgrade, it's a strategic loss.
It's a strategic loss. And what's really telling is that these resistant bacteria are often weaker, they're less fit when you put them back in a normal environment without the drug. It's a downward change, a loss of information. You could almost call it devolution. And you can't build a more complex world by citing examples of things breaking down.
That brings us to breeding, right?
Yeah.
I mean, humans have been doing this for centuries.
A perfect real-world test. Look at what we've done with dogs. The variation is just staggering.
From a tiny Chihuahua to a Great Dane, that's a huge amount of change. It looks like massive evolution in action.
It's massive variation, absolutely. It shows the incredible pre-programmed potential for adaptation within the dog kind. But there's a wall, a genetic wall. You can breed and select for generations, but you will never, ever breed a dog that's as big as an elephant. You will never get a dog that can fly.
The changes only go so far.
They only go so far. They vary, but they always reproduce after their kind. The fundamental boundary is never crossed.
So tying this all together, what's the key takeaway for someone listening to this?
The main thing to remember is that observable change, microevolution, is real. It's powerful evidence for adaptation. But it's not evidence for macroevolution. In fact, the observed mechanisms often involve a loss of information, which is the exact opposite of what macroevolution requires.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. If natural selection only works on the information that's already there, and the best examples of change we see are actually from information being lost, what does that tell you about how much incredible genetic complexity had to be there, fully functional, from the very beginning? Where did the mechanism for that arrival come from?
Okay, so let's jump right in. We're doing a deep dive today on a concept that, well, Charles Darwin himself said could completely unravel his entire theory.
Right, his entire theory. He put that challenge out there way back in 1859, and it's a foundational one.
So our mission is to analyze this concept, irreducible complexity, and these tiny molecular machines that are at the heart of it.
And that challenge from Darwin was that his theory would absolutely fail if any complex organ existed that couldn't possibly have been formed by, what was the exact phrase?
Numerous successive, slight modifications.
Exactly. And you have to remember the context, right?
Yeah.
Back then, scientists saw the cell as, just a simple blob of protoplasm.
A little jelly-filled dot, but today we know it's more like a sprawling factory, just filled with these incredibly sophisticated machines.
Which brings us to the core idea.
Right. Irreducible complexity. Or IC for short. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, the sources define it as a single system. It's made of several different parts that are all well-matched and have to interact with each other.
Okay, and the key point is...
The key is, if you take away even one of those parts, the whole system just stops working. I mean, it doesn't just work poorly, it effectively ceases to function at all.
And the poster child for this, the big example, has to be the bacterial flagellum.
Oh, absolutely. The sources call it the icon of intelligent design, and for good reason. We're talking about a literal outboard motor on the back of a bacterium.
An outboard motor, really?
I mean, it has all the parts you'd expect. A stator, a rotor, a drive shaft, a U-joint, a propeller. The thing spins at 100,000 RPM.
That's astonishing. And it can stop on a dime.
It can stop in reverse direction in a quarter of a turn. It's just an amazing piece of nanotechnology.
So to make this a bit more, I guess, grounded, there's the classic mousetrap analogy.
Right, the mousetrap. It's a perfect, simple illustration. You have 5 essential parts.
The platform, spring, hammer.
The hold-down bar, and the catch. Now, if you get rid of just one part, say, the catch.
You don't have a mousetrap that catches fewer mice.
You have a broken mousetrap. It catches 0 mice. The argument is that you can't evolve it step by step because none of the intermediate stages would work.
Okay, so that brings us to the strongest counter-argument from naturalism, which is designed to solve that very problem, the idea of co-option.
Yes, and it's a very persuasive idea. The argument is that these complex machines didn't just appear all at once.
The parts were sort of borrowed from other systems.
Exactly. They were co-opted. They were already being used for some other function, maybe as part of a simple pump, and were adapted for a new purpose.
So the intermediate steps would still have some kind of survival value. They wouldn't be useless.
Precisely. And with the flagellum, the leading hypothesis is that it evolved from something called a type 3 secretory system.
Which is a kind of biological pump, and it shares components with the flagellum motor.
It shares about 10 of them, yes. Which, on the surface, seems like a huge win for the co-option argument.
It sounds like it, yeah. 10 parts is a big head start.
But the flagellum needs about 40 parts to function. So you have 10 accounted for, maybe. But where did the other 30 come from? And, even more critically, just having the parts isn't enough.
This is the assembly problem. I mean, you can have a pile of perfect car parts in your garage.
But without the assembly instructions, that specific coded logic to put them together in the exact right order.
You just have a pile of metal. You don't have a car.
And for these molecular machines, it's even more precise. The assembly sequence is absolutely everything.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we're really talking about something called teleology.
Which is basically the study of purpose or design in natural things. I mean, when we see engineered systems, a motor, a cooling system, a navigation system, all inside a single cell, we recognize purpose.
So the takeaway for you listening to this is that the cell is no longer this simple blob. It's a city of interconnected machines.
And that complexity forces us to look at the sheer precision involved, which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. We talk about the flagellum being one of the most efficient motors known to science. But what about the complexity of the assembly logic itself? The actual information, the instructions needed to build it. What does that necessary precision tell us about the foundational role of informational coding in all of biology? Welcome to the deep dive. So you sent over this really fascinating stack of sources that kind of push back on 2 huge ideas taught in basically every high school biology class.
Exactly. Our mission today is to really get into the strongest counter-arguments for homology and for vestigial organs.
Right. 2 absolute pillars of evolutionary theory.
Yeah, and when proponents of common descent look at nature, they see these similarities and point to homology first. It's that classic textbook example.
Oh, the 4 limbs, the human, the bat, the whale.
That's the one. They all have that same 1 upper bone, 2 lower bone structure. The idea is they must have inherited it from a common ancestor.
And the second pillar is vestigial organs, the supposed junk left over from evolution.
The useless leftovers, yep. Like the appendix or the tailbone. The argument is that it's evidence of a messy history, maybe even bad design, that a creator wouldn't use.
Okay, so let's tackle that first one, homology. The counter-argument you sent over is, well, it's not what I expected.
It's a different way of looking at the same evidence. What if that similarity doesn't point to a common ancestor, but to a common designer? using an optimal design.
And this is where they bring in that Honda analogy, which I found fascinating.
Right. Think about it. A Honda Civic, an Accord, a Prelude, they all might share the same lug nuts, maybe some of the same pistons.
Okay.
They don't share those parts because they evolved from a bicycle. They share them because a common team of engineers used the best, most efficient design across different models.
But hold on, that analogy sort of breaks down for me. I mean, we're not just sharing lug nuts with other species. We share huge chunks of the same genetic blueprint, the DNA.
And that's a fair point. The sources that argue for design pivot here. They focus less on the blueprint and more on the pure mechanics.
What do you mean?
The argument is that the one bone, two bones layout might just be the best possible engineering solution for a limb that needs to rotate and bear weight. It's the optimal mechanical design.
So any good designer, human or otherwise, would just reuse that perfect solution again and again.
That's the idea. Similarity as a sign of engineering efficiency, not ancestry.
Okay, so if homology can be framed as optimal design, that second pillar of vestigial organs, that's all about arguing for bad design. But calling something useless seems like a big claim.
It is. And this is what the sources call an argument from ignorance.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically saying, I don't know what this does, so it must do nothing. And history is just littered with mistakes here.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, get this. In 1895, the official scientific list of useless vestigial organs in the human body had 180 parts on it.
Wait, 180? Are you serious?
180. And you know what was on that list? The thyroid and the pituitary glands.
No. You're telling me we classified the absolute master controls of our entire endocrine system as junk.
We called them junk because we just hadn't figured out their function yet, and that's exactly the story with the modern examples.
Like the appendix, the
Yep.
classic example.
Yeah, the appendix. It's not useless at all. It's a key part of the immune system, and it acts as a safe house for good bacteria to hide out in during an illness so they can repopulate your gut afterward.
And what about the tailbone? The coccyx. Everyone says it's a leftover tail.
Well, if you like standing upright, you should be very glad you have it. It's a crucial anchor point for muscles you need for balance and for controlling bowel movements. Absolutely vital.
So not a useless tail.
Not at all. And even those tiny little floating pelvic bones in a whale.
Yeah, I've always wondered about those. They look like the definition of a leftover part.
They're anchor points for the whale's reproductive muscles. Without those useless little bones, whales literally can't reproduce. They are completely functional.
It really sounds like labeling something vestigial is often just a placeholder for we don't know yet.
Precisely. And this is where some sources bring in the context of, say, the biblical fall, suggesting that even if our bodies aren't in some original perfect state, these parts are still incredibly sophisticated. To call them junk is really just to admit a temporary gap in our knowledge.
So to wrap this up then, the core takeaways from these sources seem to be what?
First, that similarity can be interpreted as common design using an optimal blueprint. And second, that organs we call useless are almost always found to be functional, sophisticated parts once we learn more.
And that junk is really just a reflection of our current scientific blind spots.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought. If we went from a list of 180 useless organs to just a handful in a little over a century, what incredible vital function might those last few items on the list be performing that we just haven't uncovered yet? That's something to think about. All right, so for today's deep dive, we're looking at something I think pretty much everyone has seen. You know, that big rainbow-colored chart in an old geology textbook?
The geologic column.
Exactly. The one that lays out all the eras, the Cambrian, the Jurassic, all of that, with these huge ages assigned to them.
Millions and millions of years. It's the foundation for deep history.
But here's the kicker, and this is the core claim from the sources we've looked at today. That complete, perfectly ordered column you see in the drawings.
It doesn't really exist. Not like that, anyway.
Yeah, the sources say it's basically only found in one place, the textbooks themselves. In the real world, the layers are missing, or they're completely out of order.
Sometimes even upside down. So our mission today is to really zero in on how the whole system is dated and to look at the specific circularity our notes highlight.
Okay, so the main argument, the one that gives this whole structure its credibility, it all hinges on what they call index fossils.
Right, things like trilobites or ammonites.
And the logic, It seems pretty solid on the surface. We think we know when a creature evolved and when it went extinct.
So if you find its fossil, then that rock layer must be from that specific age.
It feels like a solid cross-reference timeline, doesn't it?
It does, but this is exactly where the sources spell out this critical logic loop. It's a classic case of circular reasoning.
How so?
Well, if you ask a geologist, how old is this fossil? They'll tell you, oh, it's the age of the rock layer it was found in.
Okay, that makes sense.
But then you turn around and ask, well, how old is the rock layer?
And let me guess, they say it's the age of the index fossil it contains.
Exactly. The rocks date the fossils, and the fossils date the rocks. They date each other.
That's, wow. So if it's a closed loop like that, where did the original dates, the millions of years, even come from in the first place?
That is the crucial question. And here's a technical point that you really need to know. It's not from radiometric dating.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I think most people assume it is.
They do, but you can't use it on these sedimentary fossil-bearing rocks, the dates you see on the column. They were actually assigned back in the 1800s.
Before any of that modern technology existed.
Way before. It was based purely on an assumption, the assumption of evolution. Simple life at the bottom must be older. More complex life at the top must be younger.
Okay, let's pivot from the logic to some of the physical evidence the sources bring up. They talk about polystrate fossils.
Which sounds technical, but the idea is actually very simple.
It is. Imagine a huge fossilized tree trunk, but it's standing straight up.
And it's cutting vertically through many different layers of rock.
Layers that are supposed to represent millions of years of slow accumulation. The problem here seems pretty obvious, right?
It's a huge problem for that timeline. If those layers took eons to build up, the top of that tree would have just rotted away long before it could ever get buried.
It wouldn't even be there. So the conclusion the authors draw is that those layers had to be laid down incredibly fast.
Right. All at once in some kind of massive flood event, the whole strata forming in maybe hours or days, not millions of years.
And that ties into another problem, this time with the index fossils themselves.
Yes, the living fossil issue. The best example is, of course, the coelacanth fish.
Ah, the famous one. This was a key index fossil, wasn't it?
It was. Used to date rocks to the Cretaceous period. Scientists were certain it went extinct about 70 million years ago.
Until
one was caught alive and kicking in the deep sea back in 1938.
Which just throws a wrench in the whole system.
A massive one. I mean, if that fish is still swimming around today, its fossil can't be used as a definitive time marker for an era that supposedly ended 70 million years ago. It doesn't work.
So it's not a marker of time.
It's a marker of habitat. It just tells you where that creature lived, in this case, the deep ocean.
So putting this all together, what's the alternative conclusion presented in the sources?
The takeaway is that the geologic column isn't a record of deep time at all. It's a record of burial ordered during a single massive flood.
So simple creatures on the seafloor, like the trilobites and clams, they were just buried first because they were at the bottom and couldn't escape.
It's about ecology, not chronology. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought for you to consider.
Go on.
If the very foundation we use for measuring deep time is built on these premises from the 19th century, before modern dating methods even existed,
Right.
It really makes you wonder, what other foundational scientific assumptions might be based more on an old historical bias rather than on pure, verifiable physical measurement?
That's definitely something to think about as you try to navigate all the information out there.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are cracking open one of those big foundational ideas in geology, radiometric dating.
Mm-hmm.
For most of us, when we hear about it, it's presented as just hard physics, uranium, lead, potassium, argon.
The clock in the rock.
Exactly, the absolute proof that the Earth is billions of years old.
And that's really the perfect place to start, because our sources today highlight a critical misunderstanding right there.
Okay.
Radiometric dating doesn't actually measure time. It measures a ratio.
A ratio.
A ratio between the original parent element and the daughter element it decays into.
Yeah.
To get from that ratio to an age, you have to rely on some very specific and, frankly, unverifiable assumptions.
So our mission today is to dig into those assumptions.
That's the mission. What happens if those starting points are wrong?
Okay, so let's start with the strongest case for it. I mean, the argument is pretty compelling. The laws of physics are constant, right? We know the half-life of uranium-238 decaying into lead-206. It's precise. So measuring the ratio seems like simple math. Why question it?
Because the math is only as good as your starting numbers. Think of it like this. Imagine you walk into a room and you see a 10-inch candle.
Okay.
It's burning down at a steady 1 inch per hour. You can measure the ratio of burnt to unburnt wax with incredible precision. But can you tell me when it was lit?
Well, no, not unless I knew how tall it was when it started.
Exactly. That's the first of 3 key assumptions.
The initial conditions. The conventional model has to assume there was 0 daughter element. No lead, no argon, nothing, just the parent element when the rock cooled.
And the problem is if the rock starts with any of that daughter element already in it, it's going to test much, much older than it really is.
And we actually see this happen.
We do. Lava flows from, say, Mount St. Helens or volcanoes in Hawaii. Rocks we know are only decades old. They often come back with dates of millions of years because they cool with what's called excess argon or pre-existing lead already trapped inside. The clock simply didn't start at 0.
Which leads us to the second big assumption, the closed system. The idea that for billions of years, nothing leaked in or out.
Right, a completely isolated system. And geologically, that's a huge red flag. I mean, think about it. Water flows through rocks. And uranium, the parent element in a lot of these tests, is very leachable. It dissolves in water.
So water could just wash some of the uranium away over time?
It could. And if it does, you have less parent material. That skews the ratio and makes the rock appear significantly older than it is.
So this is where our sources point to something really surprising, the carbon-14 problem.
Yes, C14 has a very short half-life, geologically speaking, only 5,730 years.
Which means it should be completely, totally undetectable in anything older than, say, 100,000 years.
It should be 0.
Yeah.
So a group of critics, the RATE project, sent samples of things like coal and even diamonds to secular labs.
Wait, diamonds? Aren't they supposed to be among the oldest things on Earth? Billions of years old?
Billions. And the result that came back was, frankly, shocking. These labs consistently found measurable C14 still in the diamonds, still in the coal.
Which, if the half-life is correct,
it implies an age in the thousands of years, not billions. It completely changes the conversation.
So let's tie this all together for you. What we're really looking at here is a classic case of precision versus accuracy.
Exactly.
The lab instruments, the mass spectrometers, they are incredibly precise. They can measure that parent-to-daughter ratio down to the atom.
No one is arguing with the measurement.
But if the initial assumptions are wrong, if your watch is precise but you set it to the wrong time zone, then that precision doesn't give you the right time. The argument is about the interpretation, which all hinges on an unobserved past.
So that leaves you with a final thought to chew on. If the age of a rock depends entirely on these unverifiable starting conditions, what other areas of science that have to interpret the past might be just as sensitive to questioning the starting point of the data? Okay, so let's dive into this. We're looking at a really fundamental conflict in geology. It's this battle between 2 huge ideas, uniformitarianism and catastrophism.
Right, and it's fascinating because the core difference really just boils down to time. Uniformitarianism, which is, the standard view you'd find in most textbooks, it argues for slow, steady changes over millions, even billions of years.
And catastrophism is the complete opposite.
Exactly. It argues that the major things we see, the huge canyons, the mountain ranges, were formed by really rapid, violent events, things that happen in, say, weeks or months, not eons.
And for this deep dive, the main battleground our sources focus on is the Grand Canyon. It's the perfect case study.
It really is. You have the uniformitarian view, which is basically a little water and a lot of time.
And then the catastrophist view from this source material, which frames it as a lot of water and a little time, and they tie this directly to a global flood.
So if we start with the uniformitarian argument, it's very persuasive on the surface. The principle is that the present is the key to the past.
Meaning you look at what's happening now and just work backward.
Precisely. We can see the Colorado River right now eroding the canyon. It's a very slow process. So if you just extrapolate that backward, you absolutely need millions of years to carve something that massive.
But this is where the catastrophist view comes in to poke a hole in that. They point to a major geographical problem, the Kaibab upwarp.
Yes, the upwarp. The canyon cuts right through this huge plateau, this dome of rock.
And the top of that plateau is thousands of feet higher than where the river enters the canyon area.
Which is a problem, a big one. Rivers don't flow uphill to get started.
So how do they explain it?
The proposed solution in our source is what's called the breached dam idea. They argue there were these 2 huge ancient lakes, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake, trapped behind the plateau. Probably, they say, remnants from the flood.
And the dam breaks.
The natural dam gives way, and this just unimaginable amount of water comes rushing through, carving out the canyon almost instantly, like a catastrophic failure event.
And that idea of rapid formation is backed up by another piece of evidence they point to, which is actually what's missing between the rock layers.
Right. I mean, if these layers were laid down over millions of years, you'd expect to see erosion between them, wouldn't you? Little valleys, channels, that sort of thing.
But you don't.
You don't. The contact lines are often perfectly flat and smooth. One source describes it as, like, pancakes stacked up. For catastrophists, that's clear evidence of rapid deposition, one layer right after another, with no time for erosion in between.
Okay, let's move from the rocks to the fossils, because this is another huge pillar of their argument. We're talking about finding marine fossils, like clams, on top of the world's highest mountains.
Yeah, on Mount Everest, in the Rockies, I mean, that's a fact. Now, the standard explanation is, of course, plate tectonics. An ancient seafloor gets pushed up over millions of years.
But the source material we're looking at focuses on a very specific detail.
It does. It focuses on the fact that many of these fossilized clams are found closed. A clam, when it dies, naturally opens up.
So finding them closed implies they were buried alive.
We're buried alive and instantly by a massive sudden rush of sediment. That's the interpretation anyway, a catastrophic burial.
So if we pull all this together and just report on what the sources are claiming, what's the big picture here?
The synthesis from their perspective is that a global flood is the only thing that explains everything. The canyons, the flat layers, the fossils on mountains, even things like coal deposits. They argue that without that single massive event, you're, quote, forced to invent billions of years.
And they take it a step further. It's not just a geological argument for them.
No, not at all. They connect this whole debate to a passage in the Bible, 10 Peter, which they say predicts that in the last days, scoffers will be willingly ignorant of two things, the creation and the flood. So for them, it's the only history book that actually makes sense of the rocks.
It's just such a stark contrast. You have the slow, steady drip on one side and this single, violent, world-changing event on the other. It really shows how your starting point completely shapes your conclusion.
It really does. And it leaves you with something to think about, considering these arguments, the breached dams, the instantaneous burial. What does it all suggest to you about the world we live in? Are we on a planet defined by slow, predictable processes, making it fundamentally stable? Or are we living on the quiet aftermath of an incredibly violent and unstable past? It kind of changes how you look at the landscape around you.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something that's pretty foundational to modern science. The whole 65 million year timeline for the dinosaurs.
Right. And the stack of sources we have here today, they're not just questioning it. They're basically arguing it's completely incorrect.
And their claim is that humans and dinosaurs actually, coexisted.
Exactly.
So let's just unpack the stakes here for you.
Yeah.
Dinosaurs were really held up as the poster children for evolution in deep time. So if coexistence is proven,
then the whole evolutionary timeline as we know it kind of falls apart. That's the core argument in these sources.
And just to be clear, our job here is to lay out the arguments from the material, not to endorse any specific viewpoint.
Of course. And the standard view they're pushing back against is the KT extinction theory. The big asteroid, the iridium layer all over the globe, and poof, no more dinosaurs 65 million years ago.
And human and dinosaur fossils are found in totally separate layers of rock, millions of years apart.
That's the bedrock belief, yeah.
Okay, so let's get into their first big piece of evidence. The sources frame this as a scientific smoking gun. They call it the soft tissue problem.
This all centers on a 2005 discovery by Dr. Mary Schweitzer. She was looking at a Tyrannosaurus rex thigh bone.
And she found something she shouldn't have.
That's putting it mildly. After she dissolved the bone mineral, she found flexible, transparent, branching blood vessels.
Wait, not fossils of blood vessels, actual
pliable tissue. I mean, she found what looked like red blood cells, proteins like collagen and elastin, stuff that just shouldn't be there after 65 million years.
So why is that the smoking gun? What's the implication?
Well, it comes down to basic thermodynamics. Biological tissue decays. It falls apart.
Right.
The sources here highlight that a protein like collagen has a known degradation rate. Even if you preserve it perfectly, cold, dark, no bacteria, it just can't chemically hold together for that long. Forget 65 million years, it can't even last 1 million.
So the argument is the bones must be young.
That's the conclusion they draw.
Okay, but what's the mainstream counter-argument to that? I mean, surely there's a response.
Oh, absolutely. The main explanations are that it's just biofilm. A sort of bacterial sludge that looks like tissue. or that some unknown process preserved these biomaterials.
But the sources we're looking at reject that.
They do. They point to the flexibility and the complexity of the proteins and say, look, this isn't contamination, this is the real deal.
Okay, so that's the material science pillar. Let's switch gears completely now, from science to history. The word dinosaur itself is actually pretty new, right?
Very new. It was coined in 1841 by Sir Richard Owen.
So what did people call these giant reptile creatures before 1841?
They called them dragons. And what's really fascinating, and what these sources highlight, is how consistent the descriptions are across the globe.
You mean in places that had no contact with each other? Exactly. Ancient China, Babylon, Europe, even the Aztecs. They all have these legends and histories of giant reptilian beasts, long tails, horns, crests. The question these authors pose is, how could everyone be describing the same thing if they'd never seen one?
And it wasn't just stories. They point to physical evidence, like the Thea Prom Temple in Cambodia.
Right, which has these carvings all over it. And one of them, it looks almost exactly like a stegosaurus.
It's pretty hard to imagine someone carving something in that much detail without having seen it.
Which leads right into their third pillar, the coexistence challenge found in the biblical records, specifically the book of Job, chapter 40.
Where God describes this massive creature called Behemoth.
And the description is incredibly specific. It says he has bones like bars of iron, and, this is the key phrase, moves his tail like a cedar.
Like a cedar tree. Now, most modern interpretations say Behemoth was probably a hippo or an elephant.
But that's where the sources say it just doesn't fit. Have you seen the tail on a hippo? It's like a little piece of rope.
Right, not exactly a majestic cedar tree.
Not at all. But the massive muscular tail of a sauropod dinosaur, like a brachiosaurus. Now that fits the description. It makes you see the passage in a completely different light.
So let's bring this all together for you. The conclusion these sources present is that dinosaurs weren't creatures from some distant deep time.
They were just large lizards, essentially, that lived alongside early humans like Adam and Noah. The argument is that most of them went extinct after the flood and the ice age that followed.
Because of the climate changes, but also human hunting.
Exactly. That's where all the dragon slayer legends supposedly come from. It wasn't myth, it was history. Humans hunting the last of the world's large reptiles.
So here's a final provocative thought from the source of material for you to consider. Think about that cultural shift. A creature goes from being a commonly known animal, the dragon, that you might encounter or hunt, to becoming a dinosaur, a mythic beast from a lost world, only after it finally disappears.
That transition from history to myth, well, that might just be the story of extinction itself written into our own culture. All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are looking at human evolution, and specifically that famous image you've all seen, the March of Progress.
That classic lineup, right? From a stooped ape all the way to an upright human.
Exactly. And the sources we're diving into today present let's say, a very different picture, a really focused binary one.
They do. Their whole argument is that the missing link is missing for a reason. They say every fossil you look at is either 100% ape
or 100% human. No in between.
And they start by tackling probably the biggest pillar of the gradual evolution argument, our DNA similarity to chimpanzees.
Yeah, that 98 or 99% figure, you hear it all the time. It's used to make that evolutionary leap seem, pretty small.
Almost inevitable.
Okay, so let's unpack the math from our sources right away, because that 1 or 2% difference, it sounds tiny, but biologically, it's massive.
It is. We're talking about roughly 30 million base pairs of genetic information.
30 million. And the sources put that in perspective. They say that's like trying to randomly generate the information content of, 10,000 novels.
10,000 novels worth of new functional code. And they even argue the real similarity is probably lower when you account for all the gaps, maybe closer to 85 or 90%.
And it's not just about the number. They point to something called orphan genes.
Right. Genes that are apparently unique to humans, which they claim are responsible for things like our massive brain development. It's a functional gap, not just a numbers game.
So that sets the stage for how they view the fossil record. They basically go case by case through the famous hominids and treat them as either misinterpretations or frauds.
And we have to start with the most famous one, Piltdown Man. That one's not really up for debate.
No, it was a confirmed deception. It fooled the scientific community for 40 years.
An absolute textbook fraud. It was a human skull cap fused with an orangutan jaw. They'd stained it, filed the teeth down, just to make it look like a transitional fossil.
A huge cautionary tale. But the sources we're reviewing apply that same kind of scrutiny to evidence that's still accepted, like Lucy.
Ah, yes. Australopithecus, the famous upright walker. The sources really zero in on the evidence for her bipedalism.
What's their main challenge there?
Well, two things. First, they claim the crucial knee joint, the bone that supposedly proves she walked upright, was found over a mile away,
A mile.
and apparently 200 feet deeper in the strata. And second, they point to her wrist. They say she had a locking wrist structure, which is a classic trait of a knuckle walker.
So fundamentally not bipedal, according to them. And then you get their reinterpretation of Neanderthals. They completely reject the dumb caveman idea.
Completely. The argument is that Neanderthals were just humans, 100% human, adapted to a very harsh environment.
They point to the evidence, right?
Exactly. Brains that were, on average, larger than ours. They make musical instruments. They buried their dead with ceremony. These are all uniquely human behaviors,
So the skeletal shape, the stooped posture.
attributed to the brutal Ice Age conditions. Things like arthritis and rickets, not being a different species.
So with the physical gaps laid out, the sources then shift to the abstract qualities, the things that truly separate humans from animals.
This is their final argument. They say animals communicate, sure, but only humans have language, real syntax and grammar.
Animals have habits and instincts. Humans have a concept of morality, of right and wrong.
And maybe the biggest one they cite. Animals survive, but humans worship. We look for meaning beyond just existing.
And that's really the core takeaway from all this material. They conclude there's this qualitative gulf between humans and animals, a gap that no fossil can bridge.
It's a stark conclusion, but they leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought to chew on.
And what's that?
Well, if our minds, our ability to reason, are just the accidental byproduct of atoms colliding for survival, a fluke of evolution,
Then why should we trust any of the conclusions our brains come to?
including the theory of evolution itself. It's a kind of philosophical checkmate they propose, questioning whether a purely materialistic worldview can even validate itself.
Okay, let's dive in. We're going to unpack what our source material identifies as maybe the single biggest emotional hurdle to faith today.
Right. And it's probably not what most people think. It's not really advanced science.
No, it's something far more visceral. It's the problem of pain and suffering.
Yeah, this is what's often called the rock of atheism. The logic behind it feels almost airtight.
It's a devastatingly simple argument. If God is truly all-powerful, he can stop suffering.
He has the ability, yes. And if he's all good, he certainly wants to stop it.
So what's the problem? Why is there so much, just immense and seemingly random pain? Children with cancer, tsunamis that wipe out entire towns.
Exactly. And that's where the naturalist argument gains so much ground. Because, when you look at nature, it looks precisely like a world without a benevolent guide.
A world governed by blind chance.
Total indifference. As some of the sources describe it, a world that is red in tooth and claw. The sheer cruelty of it all, it makes a very compelling case for a universe without a creator.
So if that's the central problem, the theological rebuttal has to answer one huge question, right?
It does. Who broke the world?
And the starting point for that seems to be about what God wanted to create in the first place. Was the goal robots or was it sons?
That's a crucial distinction. God could have made beings that were, incapable of sin, programmed for good.
Just automatons.
Right. But automatons, robots, they can't genuinely love. Love, by its very nature, requires the freedom to choose not to love.
So moral good has to exist alongside the possibility of moral evil.
It has to. The argument is that God saw the risk of immense suffering as, worth the reward of a real relationship.
Which is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. Is that choice really worth the price we see being paid every single day?
And that question leads us directly to the core of this whole conflict. It all comes down to how you define one thing. Death.
How so?
Well, in the evolutionary framework, death is actually the hero of the story.
The hero.
It's the filter. It's the mechanism that over billions of years weeds out the weak and allows for the development of complex life, including us.
Okay, but if that's true, if God used cancer and starvation and predation as his creative tools,
then the implication is pretty unavoidable. The creator becomes a moral monster.
I see. So what's the alternative view?
The alternative view frames death as the enemy, the absolute opposite.
So God creates a very good world, and then something goes wrong.
Exactly. Death enters the story after humanity sins. The fall, this catastrophic rebellion, is the cause of suffering. It wasn't God's method.
And that changes everything because it shifts the blame.
It completely reframes responsibility.
Yeah.
In the first view, suffering is God's fault. In this one, it's our fault. We aren't living in the world God made. We're living in the world we broke.
And the sources suggest this brokenness wasn't just like a moral state. It was physical.
Yes, there's the idea that many natural disasters we see, earthquakes, extreme weather, are the physical aftershocks of that corruption. Think of the global flood cracking the Earth's crust.
It's like that line from the Apostle Paul that the whole creation groans.
The Earth itself is suffering the consequences of human choice, which brings this whole massive problem of pain to its ultimate answer, at least within this framework.
And that answer isn't a philosophical argument.
No, it's an event. It's the cross.
The cross is presented as the final proof that God isn't indifferent or distant from our pain.
He didn't just stay outside of it. He stepped directly into the mess we made, into the consequences of our choices, and took on death itself to defeat it.
So wrapping this up, what does this mean for you, the listener?
At the end of the day, the synthesis here is that you can't really blame God for the state of the world if you also reject the diagnosis, which is sin, and the cure offered, which is the gospel.
It's a complete package. You can't pick and choose parts of the explanation.
That's the argument.
Okay, that is a lot to process. So here's a final thought for you to explore on your own. If suffering really is a consequence of free choice in a broken world, how does framing death as the enemy versus the hero fundamentally change how you assign moral responsibility for the pain you see all around you? We'll let you chew on that.
All right, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into, well, the absolute bedrock of Christian thought.
We really are.
We're looking at the historical claims around the resurrection of Jesus Christ and how that single event connects to the authority of texts like Genesis.
Exactly. And I think what's key in this deep dive is where the sources tell us to start. We're not getting into debates about, carbon dating or the age of the earth.
Not at all.
The argument is that Christianity really stands or falls on one single historical event. If Jesus rose from the dead, then he's God.
And if he's God, then what he says about history, creation, the flood, all of it, is presented as true.
Right. But if he didn't, then the whole thing, well, it has no foundation.
So our mission here is to treat this whole thing like a forensic cold case.
A cold case, yeah. We're going to look at the strongest philosophical argument against miracles and then weigh it against the actual historical evidence.
Okay, so let's start with that philosophical roadblock. I mean, it's a big one.
Yeah.
David Hume.
The big one. The classic argument from the great skeptic, David Hume. Essentially, he said that a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And since our uniform experience, day in and day out, shows that dead people stay dead,
right,
the probability that a witness is either lying or just mistaken is always going to be higher than the probability that a law of nature was broken.
It makes a certain kind of intuitive sense, The most common event is the default, so anything else must be the error.
It does, but this is where the counter logic from sources like Dr. John Lennox comes in, and it's a crucial distinction.
Oh, what's that?
It's the difference between description and constraint. The argument is that physical laws, they describe what normally happens. They don't constrain what God, the author of those laws, can do.
Okay, but that still feels a little abstract to me. Can you make that more concrete for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Think of it like this. If you put $100 in your drawer today and another $100 tomorrow, the laws of arithmetic say you should have $200.
Makes sense.
But if you open that drawer and you only find $50, you don't declare that the laws of arithmetic are broken.
No, you conclude someone took your money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You conclude an agent intervened. A miracle in this framework is just an injection of a new event by an agent who operates outside of the closed system.
Got it. Okay, so if we could set that philosophical barrier aside for a moment, we can pivot to the actual historical data, the cold case files.
Yes.
Our sources say the historical record really zeroes in on 3 facts that even most secular historians will concede. First one, the empty tomb.
Right. And the key thing here is motive. Jesus's enemies had every single political and religious reason to produce the body and just shut the whole movement down.
And they couldn't?
They couldn't. In fact, the story they invented that the disciples came and stole the body, that story actually implicitly confirms the tomb was empty to begin with.
Okay, second fact, the appearances. And this isn't just, 1 or 2 people seeing something strange.
Not at all. We're talking about sources that say hundreds of people saw him at different times, in different places. The psychological argument against this is that a mass hallucination is basically impossible. It's like trying to get everyone to have the exact same dream.
Which leads to the third fact, and this might be the biggest hinge point, the origin of the Christian church.
This is the psychological core of it. You have these 11 terrified men. They're scattered, they're defeated.
Hiding for their lives.
And then, suddenly, they transform into these bold martyrs who are willing to face torture and death. I mean, men might die for a lie they believe is true, but they won't die for a lie they know they invented.
That kind of transformation, from total fear to martyrdom,
Yeah.
that needs a profound cause.
And that's the whole connection, right? It links the event to the authority.
Yeah.
If the resurrection is what happened, and it establishes Jesus as divine.
And his words about history carry divine weight.
Exactly. When he quotes Genesis as literal history, he who made them at the beginning made them male and female. That's not just a comment. It's a statement of fact from what is argued to be the ultimate authority.
So the argument we're examining is that the Bible itself is presented as the foundational starting point, the axiom.
Yes. It becomes the standard by which you judge other claims, including scientific ones, not the other way around. Its authority flows directly from that historically verified event, the resurrection.
Okay, so let's recap for a second. We've looked at the philosophical limits of assuming nature is a closed system. We've examined the three core pieces of historical evidence.
The empty tomb, the appearances, and the origin of the church.
And we've traced that direct line from the resurrection to the authority of Genesis.
Which all really boils down to one final and pretty challenging question for you, the listener. Our sources conclude that after all the evidence is laid out, the final barrier might not be an intellectual one,
but a moral one.
It becomes a moral one. The choice is whether you submit to the creator who, it's argued, backed up his claims with a verifiable act in history, or whether you cling to a competing theory that ultimately, calls you a cosmic accident. That's the choice this evidence really forces on you.